The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couture, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
That wasn't like a woman's kiss.
Well, I didn't know you wanted it like that.
Sounds better for radio.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, how about that? Welcome, everybody.
Almost.
Back to the Winemakers year-end.
By the time you're listening to this, you'll be thinking all about New Year.
Yeah, and having bubbly.
Yeah. Hopefully.
How about that? Hey, welcome, Kyle.
Altomare.
Altomare. I love that Italian enunciation. Winemaker. And Brad Kurtz, Vineyard Director from Gloria Ferrer.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Talk right into that microphone, my friend. There we go. Perfect. Well, Bart's got the traditional pour, too. Hey, everybody.
Bart's
Welcome
happy
to
to
the
have
Winemakers.
some sparkling wine today on.
Everybody here this morning having fun. Foggy day in Sonoma. It was beautiful over
Day
there.
that ends in Y, that means it's a day for bubbles.
I like that. Cheers, everybody. So, Bart.
Well, welcome, you guys. So the last time we checked in on, and the only time we checked in on Gloria Ferrer, it was when Maya, friend of the pod,
Maya Kamas.
Olds. Sorry, I still on
I know.
what she was known as, not what
25 years ago.
Right, exactly. She was working for the company, and was she GM then?
Yes, she was GM.
Yeah, and that was when you guys were starting to convert to organic farming?
Yeah.
Correct? And now, were you on board at that point?
That was the reason I was brought on board.
Okay.
So I was brought on board, and my Thomas tasked me with converting the vineyards to organic, and we're still in the process. I just finished all the lengthy CCOF paperwork in the downtime since harvest, and sending it in hopefully by the end of the week. And who knows how long it'll be till we hear back, but
How long has the process been?
so it's a minimum of 3 years. So you got to, follow all the rules and be implementing all your procedures for a minimum of 3 full years before you can even apply for the audit and go through all that fun stuff. We've been going for almost 4 years now, but we wanted to do both ranches. We have 2 ranches that we farm. And so we wanted to do everything at once rather than, knock out one ranch and then have to do it all over again for the second ranch. So we ended up having to do 4 years before we get the official stamp of approval.
So 2025 will be the first year of certification.
First full year.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
We're gonna knock on wood. The
Bottle
audit hasn't
something.
over.
We got to get through that audit first. But
But the paperwork, which is the biggest challenge, is over.
That's 90%. I mean, organic farming's hard. The paperwork's
the real deal.
So how's it feeling at this point?
Good. I mean, Kyle can talk about the wine impacts,
Yeah.
but the vineyards look great. It's been a learning curve. I didn't come from an organic farming background, but I was excited to take the challenge on, and you learn a lot, and you learn you learn as you go, and you deal with certain things, and you figure out solutions, and we've been able to figure everything out and roll with the punches and make some great wines. So
I mean,
Now-
we've seen such an increase in quality since we've started farming organically. In terms of base wine production, the weight, the viscosity, the length of finish on all these wines has come up dramatically from where we were. So that's allowing us to drive down dosage even lower, which is a big hot topic right now.
That's a great review
Well,
right
will
there,
you
man.
explain that a little bit further?
Sure, yeah.
Just, I mean, people we haven't done a ton of sparkling wine shows. but how sort of the phenolics of it essentially affect your dosage. And then I didn't know that people were like, dosage was a hot topic.
Yeah.
People want lower dosage, everything.
People want lower sugar.
Brut Nature, the whole thing, right?
Brut Nature. I mean, I think you're seeing the American palate is getting a little bit drier in general.
Okay.
You know, it used to be that true Brut, 12 grams per liter was where the American palate kind of set. But as the European palates have gone even lower, everything in Europe right now is extra Brut. Or
you
below.
can barely find anything above 6 grams per liter. in champagne.
So as we're getting grapes that are, I think the thing is when you farm organically, one, you're more in touch with the cycle of the vineyards because you have to be much more in tune because it's a proactive style of farming rather than a reactive style of farming. And being in touch with those natural cycles has just given us a better idea of how to get quality out of base wines. And as we're seeing the phenolic structure change because the vines are coming back in a balance where we're no longer having crops that are not what the vineyard can support, you're getting much more weight on the palate from a different phenolic profile. You're getting much more blending components as well, which is allowing us to create those layers of complexity so that you're not needing the sugar to simulate that weight. When you get it in the base wine and you have it in the quality before tirage, it lessens what you have to do on the back end with dosage.
That's fascinating.
So just to catch up on a couple things going back earlier, Brad, you spend not 100% of the time. I see from your Instagram that you spend some time down in Livermore Valley also.
Yeah, so I was in Livermore Valley before I took this job working for the Wente family. And my family has a 15-acre vineyard down there.
Okay.
So I take care of that vineyard. Kyle's helping me make a little wine off of it. We're, you know, playing around with some stuff.
Blends.
Doing some replanting right now. I shouldn't call it a vineyard. It's more of a empty field right now. But
it's a great time to replant.
Yeah, it's, we're in the process of replanting and, putting some better stuff in and thinking about it a little more this time around. And
what are you putting in?
Oh boy, we're putting in.
What isn't he putting in?
What isn't
he putting in is a better question.
A lot of heritage reds, so Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, Carignan. We're putting in white Rhones, red Rhones, some Vermentino, Picpoul Blanc, Counoise.
Tell them how many varietals.
12 varietals going in 15 acres. So a fun logistical project,
like
let's say.
Individual blocks? Are you doing some field blends?
There will be individual blocks, but they will all be field blended to some extent. So specifically the heritage stuff will be a little heavier field blended. But there will be like a block of Carignan, but it will be field blended with other stuff.
Throw in some Budwood.
Throw in some, graft in some, throw them in there, have them go in ahead of the main grafting crew and bud a few vines here and there over to something else and play around with it. So cool. I got a nice big spreadsheet. My nurseryman hates me. Fun stuff like that. Now's the time to, give the nurseryman a hard time because, God knows they're struggling a little bit right now.
Totally. Keep them busy and out of trouble.
Yeah.
And Kyle, you've been on board for how long now?
2 years.
So second vintage?
Second vintage here.
Yeah, yeah. And if I remember right, you guys are doing a bunch of replanting also, right? At Gloria Ferrer.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, because I know when I talked to you, you said vintage was pretty easy because there's just not much fruit left.
Yeah, and Brad and I are being very specific about looking at the property. We've been very fortunate to inherit, some clones that were imported from Champagne directly, and previously not all of those clones were still on the property. So that's something that Brad and I are bringing back and looking. Most of the data that we inherited was all pruning weights and lag weights and field data. So we're trying to chemistries, and we're trying to put actual tasting data and how it performs at our site back onto that. So that's been a big focus for us, is getting these Gloria Ferrer clones back on the property because they're absolutely fantastic for making sparkling wine. So we have some increased blocks that are going in. We have some nursery blocks that are going in, and then being strategic about the clones that we're putting in, looking at, as these vintages change and we get the highs are higher, the lows are lower, and the delta in between the two tends to be much more drastic. We're looking at how to future-proof the vineyard for the next generation.
And just Chard Pinot.
We have a few couple other fun things on there. What you're drinking right now is some sparkling Pinot Blanc that comes off our estate as well. So we do have one block of Pinot Blanc. That's something Brad and I had toyed around with, is possibly planting some more, specifically because that block is only 5 acres, 4 acres, and it's split between 3 different wines. So it's really not a lot of fruit out there. We do have some other fun experimental varietals that we're toying around with to see more what happens, but the focus will be high quality sparkling.
We got an acre and a half of Malvasia Bianca that went in last year, so that'll be fun to play around with. We've made some wine from Malvasia before at Gloria, so we're playing around with it a little bit and seeing what it'll do for sparkling wine. And right now it's being produced as a still wine. Yeah, but we're playing around with a lot of stuff.
And historically, there was some Syrah on the property, right?
Can we zoom back a little bit in general? And I mean, obviously, if you know Sonoma wine at all, Gloria. But will you just kind of the 10,000-foot quick history, but more the history of the vineyard itself? Because I'm thinking that the replant and all those vines that were pulled out right there along the highway and across from the airport and all that, was that the original planting from the 80s?
How about I take the vineyard?
Take the vineyard and I could take the history. Yep.
Right. So the vineyards, most of them were planted in the mid 80s. Right. So the whole home ranch there around the winery was planted mid 80s, and happened to get hit with phylloxera pretty much immediately after that. It all went on AXR1. So then it was replanted or interplanted or everything else that everyone was trying to do back then, trying to figure it out and roll with the punches. But
so those would be like 90s plantings.
Early 90s, yeah. Most of them were early 90s. So they were they're getting up there in age. Not always the best rootstocks for the site. We're blessed now with a lot more knowledge and a lot more research than what they had back then, but and a lot of it is just more heritage California clones. So you've got a lot of like Martini, 2A, you got stuff like that.
That's what's going back in.
No, that's what was there planted there. Okay. So not specifically sparkling wine clones.
That was the good plantings.
Yeah, that was the first replanting, if you will. The kind of fix the mistake kind of thing. And so that was all that was available back then. There really weren't very many, or if any, sparkling wine clones available at that time. And so for Gloria Ferrer being a Pinot Noir dominated sparkling wines, Pinot Noir sparkling clones make a massive difference. So as these vines start to age out and as the yields come down and as they maybe are sick or it's just time to go, we're going back in better rootstocks. These clones, our predecessors, Mike Crumley and Bob Ian-Tosca, they made a trip in the early 90s to Champagne. They brought back 12 clones of Pinot Noir and 6 clones of Chardonnay that were then certified clones. So they had them certified through Davis, and they're at FPS. We have a few of them sprinkled in on the property, stuff that has been replanted. Starting in 2014, they started with this replanting. And so they put in mostly these sparkling wine clones. And, I mean, they're every year they blow the old stuff out of the water. I mean, you talk about what you're looking for in sparkling wine and what you're looking for still wine, and they're a completely different set of parameters, right? You're not looking for color. You're not looking for tannin. You're looking for high acidity.
No phenolic content. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're planting these clones that are specifically selected for their attributes for sparkling wine rather than their attributes for still wine. They hit their ripeness curve a lot earlier on the sugar development. So as the bricks hit 18, 19, they're at a different ripeness level than those other ones that hit that maybe at 20, 21. And so it's putting in better vines for what we're looking for. Now that we have these tools, we're able to go back and replant them. But it's been a challenge. There's all of 4 vines for some of these clones in the whole state of California. So it's, going through and planting mother blocks that we can then take, grow those up for 3 or 4 years, take cuttings off of those ones to go plant commercial vineyards. So
I think a trip to Champagne is in the order for you guys.
Well, I went last
research and development.
Yeah.
And who did we have that brought shoots back in their sleeves?
We've had many people that do that, John. We just can't ever say their names.
Yeah, that's
the insider secret. It never happened. What are you talking about?
No, they did it the right way. They brought him. Well, I'll say the responsible way. They brought him in through actually Canada at the time because UC Davis's importation center was under construction and closed. So they brought him through Canada first, then to the U.S. So it was a long process. They partnered with Davis to do a bunch of trials and studies on these clones, and it's really interesting.
Well, it's just so interesting that they are so different and so much better for what you want to do.
Well, then it leads to the question of, for people that make Chardonnay that are looking for lower alcohol, more flavorful wines, will they start looking at sparkling wine clones, higher acid?
I mean, definitely. I think the biggest thing that you see here is the acid retention for these clones, both sparkling Pinot and sparkling Chardonnay as well. Pinot is great because it has the absence of color, which is exactly what we want, especially with being Pinot Noir dominated wines. You know, it's very hard to manage the phenolic structure of those because as you get color, you get tannin, you get astringency. These are all things that we're not looking for. So having a selection that's just for us, but also it's a selection that's been curated not only from a historical perspective, but from what we've seen with these clones on the property. And some of it also becomes a logistical thing, right? We have a block that's interplanted with 4 of these Pinot Noir clones, and sometimes they're about a week difference in harvest date. So when you're having everything get ripe at the same time, having that extra week where you can actually get things at optimal ripeness and not have to pick the entire estate in one night.
When you're growing 300 acres of sparkling wine and all within a mile of each other.
So, I mean, I think
that 1 week's a lifesaver.
I think that the thing is, like, they're very good as blending components. And I think that's the big difference between sparkling and still wine is the assemblage of sparkling wine tends to be where the wine is really made. With some of these wines, like with this Royal Cuvée that you're going to taste in Carneros Cuvée, some of these wines have upwards of 25 different components going into them. And we're talking Carneros Cuvée is only 1,500 cases. So a number of different vineyard blocks where for people for still wine that are looking at, hey, maybe I've got a block that gets a little bit overripe, that are looking to balance it through blending, that's where some of these sparkling clones really shine. Is you get favorable flavor at very low pH and acid that is very, very high.
Yeah.
You made a comment at the start of this whole thing, about how organically, and the change to organic was providing a tremendous increase in quality, production, weight, everything. Can you dive into that a little more?
Again, I think it comes from bringing the vineyard back into balance. That plus being more in tune with the cycles that are going on and having a closer eye on exactly what's going on out there. And, you know, Brad can help speak to this as well. But when we're farming this way, you cannot be reactive. We can't go by if we have a pest problem and say, let's just spray a synthetic pesticide and wipe out everything in a surrounding 2-mile radius because that's what we do.
Can't rely on a jug.
Exactly. So making sure what you're doing really by farming organically is creating an ecosystem, right? You have to be proactive. We're using predatory insects. We're using other things for pest management and disease management and things like that. So you're cultivating an ecosystem within your vineyard, which brings everything, not only the cycle of the vine, but the cycle of the entire property back into balance. And I think that's where organic actually increases your quality. One, it's boots on the ground because you have much more time spent in the vineyard. Brad and I are out there from the start of growing season and on, which is now out there weekly. And then as we get closer to harvest, it becomes bi-weekly and then every single day as we're leading up to harvest. So it's being much more in touch with it and understanding that these vines are not going to crank out 8, 12, 15 tons an acre, right? So we need to make sure that it's what the vineyard can support. Right. And that's where you see the increase in quality.
Is sparkling wine, or in your case, do you guys mechanically or hand pick?
Everything's hand picked.
Everything's hand picked. In general, I mean, sparkling wine is typically all hand-picked because it's
a little more challenging with Pinot Noir than Chardonnay
because it doesn't want to come off
the color.
The color, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, right. It's sitting in the
yeah. So that's the key is minimal phenolics and tannin, picking up tannin and color.
Right.
You know, you want your wine to be crystal clear. You don't want it to be slightly pink unless that's the goal. In which case, you want to control how you do it. You know, you don't want to just leave it up to chance. So it's constantly a challenge, and that's why hand picking is so important for high-end sparkling wines.
Right.
The biggest driver of quality is the time for sparkling is the time between when that grape hits the picking box and the time when that grape hits the press pan, right? So the juice is actually being removed. Right. And something that I have done in the past and bringing to Gloria as well is taking that first 10 gallons per ton and actually sending it to the tie tank, because that's where all of your vineyard residue, your dust, your dirt, your skin phenolic content is coming out in from as it's sitting there macerating in the bins. And our picking time is often only, sometimes as short as 45 minutes from the time that grape hits the box to the time it's in the press.
Yeah, we have the benefit of the vineyards being sometimes
up the hill.
And
sometimes down the hill, but it's within. Our fruit gets delivered on tractors, not on trucks.
So
and having our own crew.
So you used a word I didn't quite hear it. What sort of tank? The first.
So you have the few cuts. So with still wine, you're thinking about free run and hard press. In sparkling, we use cuvée, premier tie, and then the hard press tie, right? So a Ramier tie. And what I do is I take that first 10 gallons of the cuvée and I send that to the tie. Again, because as it's been macerating in the bin, it's the stuff that is, cleaning everything off. It's got all the residue from the vineyard, all the residue from the boxes, the equipment, everything like that. It's just a way for me to capture only the purest form, and all these wines are only cuvée cut. So it's a way for us to capture the purest form of that sparkling juice without any interference whatsoever.
So everything's picked into FYBs.
Nope. Half-ton bins.
Half-ton bins. Okay.
Yeah. The goal being it gets in the press within
we're close
an hour.
Right.
So it's not sitting jostling around on a truck going down the highway. Crushing berries. But, I mean, the idea being the heavier
when you said boxes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You just mean half-ton boxes.
Yep. Yeah, when you press it, you squeeze all of the stuff
before
you
we
don't want out of
get too far, will you talk a little bit more about that? Because I kept forgetting to spit it out. It was really good.
It's an easy one to forget.
The Pinot Blanc, is that a new item in the Gloria lineup? Or I love the bottle. Just give us sort of the rundown.
And then go right into the history, because we'll never get back to it.
Sure. Yeah, so this is one of our new innovation series wines, and innovation has always been true to the heart of what we do at Gloria Ferrer. The Ferrer family was forward-thinking, and in their planting of this property, they bought this property before Carneros was even an American viticultural area. The property was purchased and started development in 82. Carneros didn't become an AVA until 83. And at that time, not a lot of people were planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay down there. It was widely considered a region where grapes wouldn't grow very well, stay away, the soils aren't great. And the Ferrer family said no. So we've brought back a line true to the heart of what we do, which is innovation. So it's pushing the boundaries of what sparkling wine, what we think sparkling wine can be, using varietals that aren't typically used. And now in Champagne and in other sparkling regions, they do have Pinot Blanc, but it's more as a filler. It's to add a little pop of fruit. It's to add a little texture to the wines. And we looked at it and said, well, why don't we try and do this as just a standalone wine? We have Pinot Blanc on the property. It's been part of our history for a long time. That's Blanc is what, the mid-90s?
Yeah, I think they've had Pinot Blanc, at least 30 years Pinot Blanc planted on the property. So
this was kind of one of the first kickoffs of in our innovation line here in the new glass package as well. So that's another thing that's been very inherent to our DNA, which is glass. Gloria Ferrer herself has one of the largest sparkling wine glass collections in the entire world. Some of it is housed with us at Gloria Ferrer, some of it's at Freshenet in Spain, and then the very valuable, very good pieces live with her. And the first iteration of this was she actually created the Gloria flute. Which is it's a combination of a coupe glass and a flute. And that was designed specifically by her for the wines. And then we created the Carneros Cuvée bottle, which you see here next. And this is the newest iteration, which is just the next evolution in the line of Gloria glass. It's our proprietary Gloria mold for all of our wines that will be going in that. So sparkling Pinot Blanc is what you had first, 94% Pinot Blanc, 6% Chardonnay.
Delicious.
We use just a little bit of Chardonnay just to add a little bit of structure so it stands up to the time in tirage. That spends about a year in tirage before we take it off, with the intent of being something that's very fresh, very linear, very focused wine that is different than any of the other wines that we make. So that innovation tier is really about driving down some ideas. And, Brad and I sit around a lot. We sit about 8 feet apart from each other in the offices.
Yeah,
so
we share an office, which is
It's very helpful. It's very, very helpful. But we're always kicking ideas around for experimentation.
I mean, I got to give a shout out to the bottling team because you don't make it easy to bottle either with these packages.
Well, imagine it's not just bottled once; it's bottled twice.
Yeah.
You have your tirage bottling, and then you have your disgorging bottling.
Yep.
You got double the equipment.
Yep.
Double the times you're touching it.
Will you also just quickly give at least at Gloria your sparkling wine process and maybe a quick glossary on the words that you're dropping for those of us, our listeners, not the hosts, clearly, the listeners who might not know what you're talking about.
Sparkling wine is a completely different level of production than it is for still wines. So the base process, what we refer to as base wines, is the starting process for us. The viticulture is also different as well. The goals, as Brad mentioned earlier, the goals for farming sparkling wine are different than the goals for farming still wine. We don't want to create that stress factor that you create with still wine, but you get the concentration of tannin, color, anthocyanin, all the things that we're looking for in still wine. We want the absolute opposite of for sparkling wine. No stress. So often we're not leafing unless we absolutely have to for spray penetration or anything like that. And once we pick, the base process is exactly the same as it is making still wine, except we're just functioning at a much earlier ripeness. So our bricks, when we pick, are often between 18 to 19 and a half. Sometimes we'll let Chardonnay get a little bit riper. Sometimes we'll let Chardonnay go up to 19.8, 20 on the right blocks if we need to get flavor. From there, you produce just as you would a white wine. Most of our wines are in stainless steel tanks for fermentation. We are starting to innovate with some new vessels as well. We're using barrels, which traditionally Gloria Ferrer has not used barrels for fermentation for sparkling wines. So we brought that in a couple of years ago.
What size barrels?
59s right now, just the normal 228 liters. My intent is to get us to punch-ins and foudres eventually, 3,000 plus liters, but we're not there yet. We need proof of concept first. Is always
some eggs.
Exactly. Well, so what we are using is sandstone amphoras right now. We started with one. It was phenomenal for sparkling wine. We did an experiment called Chardonnay 3 Ways, where we put it same block into barrel, stainless steel, and sandstone, and made. If we poured those wines blind for you guys, you would have been like, these are not the same wine. All picked on the same day, fermented with the same yeast. The only difference was the vessel.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So anyways,
what was your favorite?
Well, we liked honestly, the best was a blend of the three, right? As it normally is. But some of the whole. Exactly, where it's greater than its individual parts. But they're all being used for specific purposes, right? I think the thing that we're very cognizant of is maintaining a similar house style, but just adding layers of texture and complexity there. So the base wine process is exactly the same as it is for still wine, except we're functioning at a finished alcohol of between 10 to 11%, whereas still wine's 12.5 to 14.5%. From there is where it gets the technical difficulties and challenges start, because now we're talking about blending to a specific target, not only for case target, but you're also being cognizant of historical percentages in the blends. Because that's where you really can make a difference. More Chardonnay tends to lean into a little bit more ageability. You have a better phenolic content there. It adds structure. It maintains acidity better, especially in warm vintages. We know Pinot Noir, it's really great at assuming the site and the vintage and which it's grown. So we use that as more of our vintage signature, or the Pinot signature, as we like to say. Pinosity is what Brad and I call it, is how typical of Pinot Noir. We got tired of saying that whole sentence, so we just created a word. So once we determine the blend and put it all together, we put base wine, so that wine we just created, a yeast culture, and sugar in a bottle. And instead of putting a cork on it, we put a crown cap on it. That crown cap allows the CO2 to actually dissolve into the wine. Rather than during base wine fermentation, that CO2 that's created by the yeast, it just evaporates, it gets absorbed into the atmosphere, bubbles out. When we put a crown cap on it, we essentially capture all of that carbon dioxide, and that's how you get the bubbles in the bottle. That's method champenoise or method traditionnelle. From there, you have another stylistic choice. How long are you going to age this wine? And that's something that we look at, because as you start to age the wine longer,
so that's assemblage, right?
Yep.
Taking it to once it's
assemblage is blending. Tirage bottling is that
first bottling.
That first bottling of putting yeast, base wine, and sugar in the bottle, and then you have aging, and that is a stylistic choice. The second wine you have in your glass is Royal Cuvée. This spends 5 years in that bottle before we actually disgorge it.
Under the crown cap.
This is the 2015 vintage, right?
Yep.
Vintage.
So this is the current
vintage.
Right.
Yeah. So you can see we're moving away from that fresh fruit. We're moving more towards the stylistic component of the yeast adding flavor and adding a textural component to the wine. Mm-hmm. And so aging is actually why I fell in love with sparkling wine, because it's, still wine production. Once you put that wine in the bottle, you're done. It's up to the consumer or your own choice as to when you release it or when they drink it, right? But here we get to actually craft a wine where we say, I would like to create the wine that has a little bit more texture, a little bit more of that yeasty, creamy brioche. Let's leave it in the wine for 5 years. Then we have something like our Carneros Cuvée, which will taste next, 7 years in the bottle and 1 year under cork before we release it. So really showcasing the difference in stylistic components there. Once you decide that you're done aging, you then have a process called disgorgement. So we've got all that yeast in the bottle, right? And then it's done doing its job, and we have to get it out. So we have to do a process called riddling, which is gently agitating the bottle on its side and increasing the elevation, as we call it, or trying to get it down to the neck of the bottle. And once we get it into the neck of the bottle from riddling, we have to get it out. So we freeze the neck with a very, very cold liquid, and then we pop that ice plug out, which expunges all the yeast and all the sediment that's in the bottle, leaving you clean wine. And then the last process we do is adding the dosage liqueur, which is the final balance of acidity and sugar. And that's another stylistic choice that you can make based on winemaking style, on house style, on the wine that you're actually making. And then we put a cork in it, label on it, and it goes out in the glass that you are drinking right now.
And at some point you're taking it out of. It's a different bottle for the élevage.
Nope. Everything is with method traditional.
Method traditional. But some of these are being rebottled. Nothing's being rebottled.
Nothing is being rebottled. It's just two processes to get to the final
So
product.
it goes into this bottle when the tirage happens.
Yep.
Freezes the neck, disgorges it. It's all in this bottle.
Okay, so
Riddling's done in this bottle.
in the world of for the gram and all these people making pet nats and whatever they are, it's popping the crown caps off.
Yep.
One at a time.
Yep.
You guys are a big winery. Mm-hmm. How do you do it?
We have a very sophisticated bottling line that has a number of machines that do all of this process for us.
We have a
I'd love
great
to come
director
out
of
and see that.
operations.
Yeah, our director of operations, Victor, manages all of it.
Yeah.
How much volume comes out?
The volume that comes out is dependent on how long you've let it age and how small you can get that yeast plug. It ranges from anywhere from 2 to 7 milliliters per bottle that's expunged. But what we do is we have
Is that just waste at that point?
Yes,
It just hits the wall of the machine.
Well, we actually recapture it and sell it as distilling material for things to make like alcohol for hand sanitizer, things like this, because you can. We don't like to be. There's alcohol. We don't like to be wasteful.
Not completely worthless.
But what we do is when the bottling is actually happening, because you have that loss of volume, and because you're going to take out a little space to put your dosage liqueur in, we have to seed the machine. The bottling line is very different than a still wine bottling. We have to seed the machine with some topping wine. So a certain percentage based on how much we're making becomes topping wine, so that you're always topping that lot with the same wine that's coming out. And that's where you can lower it below, add your dosage, then top back up to 750, because that's the one thing you have to make sure is you get 750 finished milliliters in this bottle. Otherwise, the government gets very, very mad at you.
And
They don't want you selling 749.
They want their money.
They
want their money.
and you call it dosage liquor.
Liqueur.
And can you explain that?
Yes, it is a select base wine, which we put sugar in at a very, very, very high volume. So this is a very dense solution. That way we can add the minimal amount possible. Dosage usually ends up being only about 2 to 4% of the wine based on the sugar level and the style that you're trying to do.
And is the sugar grape concentrate?
No, the sugar is actually pure cane sugar, but it's very highly refined, called special sanding sugar. If you could look at the sugar under a microscope, it looks exactly like a sugar cube, but no rough edges. One molecule of sugar is exactly perfectly square, very easy to dissolve, and that's very important so that we actually get everything fully dissolved.
Right.
And I think the one thing that we didn't talk about is with the dosage liqueur is choosing the wine that you use for the dosage liqueur. It's kind of your final blending, final part of the blending, if you will. And Kyle has inherited
The last chance to not fuck it up.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
That's a good way to put it.
A lot of these wines have been sitting for 5 years. A different winemaker made a lot of these wines, and this is Kyle's chance to kind of put his stamp on it and say, maybe it's 2% of the blend, right? But it can be a big change. You can really freshen up a wine, or you can add a lot of age character. And they've been holding wines in reserve for these dosage liqueurs going back, I don't know,
We have
more
stuff
than
all
10
the way.
years.
Yeah, we have stuff all the way back to like 2011 still, right?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And those are obviously all still, they're in barrel or in tank or something.
We keep them in stainless steel, and the benefit that we have is that we keep them at a very, very, very high gravity. 650 grams per liter is the solution strength. That at that level, you're not re-fermenting anything. I also keep the sulfur very, very high.
It's kept in the stuff that's 13 years old in there is the liqueur. It's not just the base wine that you would add the sugar to.
Correct, and that also helps buffer oxidation potential as well.
Yeah,
with that level
essentially
of
it's
sugar.
like the world's sweetest dessert wine. You can keep it open for
Right.
50 years and it wouldn't matter.
That's exactly, and the reason for that being stylistic implications, as Brad said. When we both inherited these wines, there was a specific process that was used, and we were looking at this and looking at it kind of critically and saying, each wine needs its own individual treatment. There is no recipe when we're making these wines or growing these wines. So switching that 2% to just intentionally dosing each wine for what it wants and what it needs, which comes with a lot more work. You have to taste the base wine, finished fermentation without any sugar in it, and try and figure out, based on what I have to use, which direction should I go? And then based on the historical side of this, how can we make this feel like a similar wine, just elevated a little bit?
The amount of like bench trials and
Oh my God.
blending sessions that you must do,
Brad will tell you.
Yeah, so
His side of the office is just
right
like
here. My desk is right here, and there's a blending table right in between us. And I'll be out in the vineyard, and I'll come back in, and there'll be about 30 bottles on the table of 5 different trials, and it's you got to pick.
It's organized chaos. That's the best.
You got to pick the liqueur you're going to use. You got to pick the dosage level in the liqueur.
Yep.
You got to pick, and so he's trying 4 or 5 different dosage liqueurs, and then you got to try each of them at 5 different sweetnesses, and then even then he goes back and dials it in even more, and it's a lot of bench trials.
And I mean, when you get to something like this that you're drinking right now, Royal Cuvée, our bench trials go down to the 0.1 grams per liter.
Yeah.
We're splitting. This is where I split hairs to the umpteenth degree. Because when you're crafting a wine like this, and this wine has 40 years of history. This is our 40th harvest this year. So this wine has been, it's got a lot lot of history to it. And this is one that you need to make sure you get right, especially 5 years.
No pressure.
Don't mess it up, right? But again, this is one that Royal Cuvée for me is always a very textural wine. You're moving away from the aromatic impact of anything because you've had so long entourage or in aging entourage that you really want to utilize the texture and make sure that it feels seamless from front to back. It's very voluminous, right?
Yes.
You get volume, it goes all the way around. It's very viscous. There's a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And it's a wine that you can drink on its own, but it stands up to food. That's kind of the point. Is
It's
finding that
absolutely
balance.
delicious. And when I tasted it, it definitely, I don't know what I was expecting, but I was kind of blown away that it was 2015.
Yeah. It feels fresh,
Right. and
like it just came out of bottle,
right.
But it has the age character to it, and
right, because it doesn't have the fruit character.
Yes.
Isn't the main focus.
No, we've moved into that spicy character of Pinot Noir, that baking spice, the kind of golden apple, and that Chardonnay is what we use to carry it through. So you'll see as we get through these blends that age longer, we're using more and more Chardonnay in the blend.
I don't know. Did we say what the blend was on this one?
We didn't. That's 67% Pinot, 33% Chardonnay.
Yeah. So these 2 wines, I'm pointing at the Carneros Cuvée and the Royal Cuvée, are kind of the best grapes from the estate every year. So we go through and we grade. At the end of harvest, we grade the base wines. Kyle finishes up making the base wines.
Yep.
We're able to, for the most part, keep every vineyard block. We have about 50 vineyard blocks. Keep every one of them separate in the cellar. through the creation of the base wines.
Yep.
And then we're able to grade them all blind. So we go through, and so we don't have any preconceived notions of, hey, that was a really pretty block out there this year. It looked really nice. I'm sure the wine's great. It's just bottle 1 through 30. And we go through and we give our notes and grade them with the understanding that these aren't single vineyard wines. They're a component in a blend.
Yeah.
So we have to go through understanding maybe this one's lacking a little acidity, but the weight on the palate or the length of the finish is extraordinary, So you have to look at the different, how it will fit into a blend to evaluate the wines. And then, we give them A+ through, hopefully nothing lower
Hopefully
than
no
a B-.
C grades, yeah.
But it does pop up occasionally, and that's usually when it's time to replant. But it's one of those things where when we're blending the Carneros Cuvée and the Royal Cuvée, it's only those A-grade lots that are on the table for these blending sessions, because they need to hold up to the aging process and be able to hold for, 5 years, 8 years.
Yeah.
We have library, so we have an extended tirage library selection. We just opened some Blanc de Blancs, so 2010 Blanc de Blancs. We've had some stuff going back much further than that. We had a winemaker's dinner. We had an 04 Royal Cuvée.
03 Carneros.
03 Carneros Cuvée. Yeah. So these wines can sit in tirage for a long, long time.
And with these Icon and Tête de Cuvée wines, we keep back 25 cases of each in tirage so that we can hold them for an extended period of time, up to 20 years in the terms of Carneros Cuvée. And that, again, the point is to showcase to consumers and to people that when you're aging in tirage, it is much different than aging under cork, because you have that yeast there, and even though that yeast is dead and it's fully autolyzed, but it acts as a bioprotectant. Its yeast is very, very good even when it's dead in the bottle and doesn't consume any more sugar. It's very good at consuming a lot of oxygen. Yeah. So what we do is we have wines that are disgorged, what we call on program. So, for in the case of Royal Cuvée 5 years, and then in case of Carneros Cuvée 8, right? But then you get to taste the same vintage that's been on tirage for 20 years and see stylistically what happens to the wine,
right?
And showcase that much of sparkling is technical about how you're going. You have to kind of think of this backwards, right? You have to think about when you're making these blends, how long is this wine going to age for? That kind of helps determine my blend percentage and what stylistically I need in that wine, so that it can stand up to 15, 20, even 30 years in tirage in the case of some of these champagne producers and stuff like that, right?
Did you make sparkling wine before you got to Gloria?
I did,
You
yeah.
did, okay.
Yeah, I made sparkling wine for Artesa, and then I had a number of clients from various regions of the world, some in Champagne, some in
So this has all
South
sort
America.
of been your specialty, because I'm sitting here thinking, just tasting the base wine is a completely different skill set.
Yes.
Than tasting.
Yeah, you have to really.
Than tasting still wine.
Yeah.
I taste things up to 16% alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Grenache and Zinfandel. And you're still thinking about how do you make a blend that is going to age for 15 years or 20 years or 30 years.
Yeah.
But a 14% alcohol wine tastes totally different than something that's 10 or 10%.
And pH at 2.9.
Yeah.
That's like a completely different taste experience.
Yeah.
I fell in love with making sparkling wine because it's something that you truly, I believe there's so many more touch points there that it was just, for me, it scratched that creative itch in a different way. And I still love making still wine. We do make still wines at Gloria Ferrer. I still love making still wine, but sparkling has really been my passion, just because it's a wine that you really get to touch all the way through.
I was just trying to determine how many different steps you go through versus what you guys go through at 16600. I mean, it's got to be double.
Probably more.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, way more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sort of by default, our goal
Is to do as little as
little
possible.
steps as possible. Not just because that's what we want to do, but that's the
Well,
wine.
that's our goal too, but unfortunately, there's just more
But the
steps
level
involved.
where you have to start is completely different.
Right.
The baseline is much higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, with still wine, sometimes you're racking just for the sake of racking, or you're trying to push the age into the wine because it's so young, right? And you want to force it along, and it has huge impact also, but not nearly as much as what you guys do.
Yeah.
and the type of touching is completely different.
And the things you run into are completely different, right? VA is almost non-existent when you're talking about sparkling wine. If you get VA in sparkling wine, you did something horrifically wrong,
right?
Like really catastrophically wrong, right? If you can get
with
VA
pH
to
is
grow
that
at
low,
pH 2.9,
right?
Wow, I'm impressed.
Right.
But
it came from the vineyard at that point.
That's maybe
Sorry,
maybe. I mean, everybody likes to blame vineyard, but sometimes
we
it's in the
catch
winery.
a lot of stray punches.
A lot of times it's in the winery.
Vineyard. Oh, there's reduction vineyard. It's got to be vineyard.
It's his fault.
It's always my fault. It's all right. I'll take the punch.
But whereas like
I got a strong jaw.
with things like Grenache and Syrah, Mourvèdre, Cabernet, like you guys are making, oxygen becomes your friend, right? You really want oxygen to get that aldehyde bridge, lengthen those tannin change, make the tannins feel softer. I want the opposite. I don't have that phenolic structure to hide behind where I'm like, if we get oxygen, I get aldehydes like that.
Well, and it's
it
the
is
same
a big problem.
Yeah,
right?
and it's the same thing. It's such a naked wine, if you will, because it's when there's something wrong in the vineyard, when you have sunburn, when you have any sort of issues in the vineyard, there's nothing to hide. There's no oak to hide behind.
Right.
There's no malolactic fermentation. There's no steps in the process to hide any flaws. It's just the wine is what it is, right? If it's got astringency, bitterness from the vineyard, you're screwed. You really get one shot at it, and it's there's nowhere to hide. So
I mean, and keep in mind my sulfur level is always a problem as well. I have a total sulfur requirement that I can't exceed because yeast, when you put them in bottle, they don't really want to do it in the presence of 150 parts of total sulfur.
Oh, of course,
right?
Yeah.
So it's like I think the challenge is
parts of total sulfur.
I mean, right? I've
never.
I mean, for us,
not.
it's like 55.
Yeah.
That's kind of our top end.
Yeah.
So when you think about this and you're like, okay, well, you have to kind of just adjust your expectations and adjust what you're looking for, and you learn to keep a watchful eye in a different way,
right?
Because the
different hazards.
the things that you're looking out for are just different. You encounter it differently. But
how long does the base wine, and in what vessel does the base wine age before you do the assemblage and tirage?
So right now
I'm learning the words, John. Did you know?
That was good.
So the goal with sparkling wine is to get it into bottle as fast as possible.
Right.
You're much more protected in that state. That being said, I put together little pre-blends to kind of top tanks after we do that grading tasting that Brad was talking about, like with like, aromatically similar with aromatically similar. And that's just to protect us over the winter. And then we come back in January and really start getting stuff down. So we have a total aging time of about 4 to 6 months, ideally, if everything goes according to plan. With our barrel fermented wines that we're starting to experiment with and our sandstone wines, sandstone is a new one for me. I'm kind of pushing the limits farther than I think I normally would, just to see. I always like to see what happens when we get this, right? Like, where's the line? Okay, let's go a little bit past that line. Okay, let's go a little bit past that. So it's with the newer vessels that we're using, there is a little bit of a different methodology to this. But once I start seeing aldehydes, then it comes right back to stainless steel. I'm like, okay, we got to rein it back in. So total aging time is about 4 to 6 months in tank, barrel, or sandstone before we blend it in stainless steel, filter, put the yeast culture together, sugar, bottle.
And filtration is cross flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. History.
Okay.
Let's get back to that.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. 1982 was when this whole thing started, right? So 82, the property was purchased by the Ferrers, and the Ferrer family is a very prominent winemaking family over in Spain. This has been their passion and innovation project since the start. It's been something, they're the owners of Freixenet in Spain, which is one of the largest sparkling cava producers in the world. Okay. And this is a story of love. The brand is named after our matriarch, Gloria Ferrer, who is Jose's wife, and he dedicated this brand to her. The Ferrer family is still involved. Pedro comes out a couple times a year, and we see him. Pedro is their son. And
we just recently lost Jose, right?
We did just recently lose Jose. He was 99 years old.
Wow.
So the moral of the story is drink more things with bubbles in it.
Yeah.
And
you'll live a long, happy life.
Yeah, and Brad and his team actually just got finished with our homage to him, which is a very nice 99-year-old olive tree that was just planted on the front of the property.
Cool.
Wow. Absolutely the most gorgeous tree I've ever.
Yeah, beautiful tree.
And watching Brad and his team get this thing in was that was a feat in and of itself.
That was an interesting day.
Yeah. So,
where did you find a 99-year-old olive tree?
You can find them along the side of Arnold Drive.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Now, there's
From
a few
Roy.
By the cover of darkness.
Oh, you're one
it's
of
not
those
like
guys.
that. It's not like that.
No, it would be that would be a pretty big operation.
You
to get
would
that
you
thing
would
out.
notice a missing 100-year-old olive tree.
But yeah, no, we purchased one of those trees. It was from I believe a orchard out in Clovis that was subject to get ripped out, and they saved some of the trees, and we were lucky enough to get one, and it's beautiful.
And so when the Ferrers purchased this property, the intent was always to make the highest quality sparkling wine that they could in California. And at a time when other families were out here, both French and Spanish, nobody was really planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. You know, you had another Spanish family on the other side of the hill planting Macabeo, Chirello, these cava growing varieties. And the Ferrer family said, no, we're in this we want to compete with the top sparkling producers, not only in California, but in the world, right? So looking at growing champagne varietals in Carneros, that started in 84, first plantings happened.
84, A block and B block, planted in 84.
Yeah, and we actually just did a real fun project, Brad and I. We took, for our 40th harvest, this is our 40th anniversary, we created a method ancestral sparkling wine. So a little bit different than Petnac because we actually disgorge it. But we took the two oldest blocks on the property and combined them in the first reserve percentage, which is 67% Pinot, 33% Chardonnay. And then I fermented it to exactly the sugar level that I wanted in tank, bottled it with a native yeast and natural sugar, but I used a riddling aid, some sulfur to clean it up, and then let the fermentation, I chilled it all the way down to 31 degrees, arrested the fermentation, bottled that, then put it in the warehouse to cool down for a couple of weeks, brought it into our caves, let it warm back up, and finished naturally fermenting in bottle. So what you get is a historical method of production, but you're drinking a 40th anniversary sparkling in the 40th anniversary itself. So we actually just released that 2 weeks ago, which was kind of fun. Cool. It was a stressful project for a while. The winemaker did not sleep for the better part of 3 months as I'm going.
Got a lot riding on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our GM was like, well, we have the release date targeted. And I'm going, okay. She's like, it's going to be done, right? I'm like, absolutely it's going to be done, right? Checking pressure again. It's okay. Here we go.
But it got done.
It got done. And it's delicious. It's damn good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, just a different style. So, very forward thinking. And from there, you get the acquisition of our Circle Bar Ranch. That was in 97. So that adds another 127 acres. Yeah, 127 acres.
Planted acres.
And that's just past the Yennies.
Yep.
Yeah.
On that side on the west side of the.
And well, at some point, will you talk about the difference between the soil structure at that ranch compared to
that's
we'll make it we'll make it through history eventually, and then and then we could talk farming more.
It'll actually be the new year by the time you get through this show.
Yeah. So Circle Bar comes in 97, and from there you really start to see the programs being built out and the winery coming into the modern era. And you have in the 90s, you have Bob Iantosca and Mike Crumley going over to Champagne and bringing back cuttings. That total project was about 24 years before we actually started to see the first fruit off on our property, all the way up to what Brad and I have been trying to continue, which is bringing those heritage Gloria Ferrer clones back to the property. As Brad mentioned earlier, sometimes there's as little as 4 vines for these clones that still sit at FPS. And it's hard when you have such a storied history to leave your fate in someone else's hands. So that's something we didn't want. We wanted to get that back to the property because it is a very rich historical point of talking, but it's more about how we're taking that history and driving it forward, right? Adapting production methods, pushing the boundaries a little bit with things like our innovation series, with our method ancestral, with adding layers of complexity. I'm a big music fan, and I always say that people ask me, how are the wines changing? And I said, it's not a change, it's an evolution, right? And what we're doing is we're still listening to the same record, right? But we're just going to listen to it with surround sound. So the wines are going to feel like Royal Cuvée is always going to feel like Royal Cuvée, but we're going to add little things of intrigue and little layers of complexity there that really are just going to take these wines to the next level.
Are you only the second winemaker since?
Third.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, that's right. There was someone.
Yep.
But Bob was still on board.
Bob was still on board at that point. Yeah. Bob was here until 2015, and then he started consulting. He was consulting all the way up to like 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
Wow. It's remarkable.
Yeah, he had a long career there.
Yeah, and Brad's only the second vineyard manager. Mike was here for all the way up until 2020, 2019.
2020, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and our vineyard manager, Alberto Robledo, just retired after harvest this year.
33 years.
33 years.
33 years.
Yeah, 33 years there and just retired. So, yeah, we've had some longevity at Gloria Ferrer for sure.
What was the property before Ferrer bought it?
I believe it was cattle.
Cattle ranch.
Yeah. Cows and hay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the on the Illumina bottle, the no corkscrew.
Yeah.
Everything's there for a reason.
Right.
There's a story as to why, But
go ahead.
You'd be surprised.
We want to hear it.
You'd be surprised how many people stick a corkscrew in a bottle of sparkling and get surprised very quickly.
That sounds dangerous.
Mildly.
There's a reason why there's a big X through a picture of a corkscrew on the bottle.
People may not read.
Lawyer put it there.
People may not read, but they understand pictures, right?
Wait, I missed the picture. Let me see this.
Since you guys have done a lot of traveling over in Champagne, can you compare soils and climates between the two spots? And
I asked Brad how crazy it would be if I wanted to add like 15 tons of limestone to our property. And
a lot of chalk
immediately
out there.
I was immediately shot down.
Yeah. So when we think about how we farm our vineyards, we have to look at what is the benchmark, right? The benchmark is obviously Champagne, right? If you're trying to make world-class sparkling wine, you're automatically, half the people that come to the tasting room ask, "Oh, can I try your Champagne?" That's still a ubiquitous term for sparkling wine.
Sure, absolutely.
And so the benchmark is obviously Champagne. So you have to look at what are the growing conditions in Champagne? What are the vines look like? What are the stress levels in the vines? What do the soils look like? So when you look at Champagne, you have clay and chalk soils, essentially, right? Which hold a massive amount of water, very fertile soils. If you ever spent the summer in Champagne, it is not like Sonoma. It is quite cold and wet. It rains at least once a week.
Oh yeah.
It's usually pretty hazy and cloudy. They get a few days of sunshine, but not nearly what we get here. So those vines are essentially experiencing no stress. They're hedging multiple times a year. They have to plant more densely. By law, they have to plant more densely to get the vines to compete with each other to essentially keep them from just growing and growing and growing. You have to increase your vines per hectare. And so you basically have a situation where the vines are never stressed unless you have freak vintages. In recent years, they've had, obviously, like everyone else, they've had problems and issues with drought and heat and all of that. But when we look at how we're farming our vineyards, obviously we don't have Champagne's climate, but we do have similar soils on a lot of our blocks. Yeah. We don't have the chalk, but we have a lot of clay loam, which for Cabernet might be about the worst soil you could possibly plant Cabernet on. But for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, specifically for sparkling wine production, it is excellent. These soils soak up a ton of water. They're very deep soils. They hold a lot of water and it just sits there. Obviously in Sonoma, we basically don't get rainfall from like maybe mid-May to, if we're lucky, mid-October. Well, not for you guys, but for us, if we're lucky, mid-October. We're long done by October. So, we want to make sure we can soak up every drop of rainfall and hold on to it and keep it there for the vines. We also want to look at,
You're talking about the estate.
The estate, yes, the Gloria Ferrer estate. Yeah. So we have our home ranch and we have our Circle Bar ranch. The soils that we grow the sparkling wines on are essentially all these clay loam soils. It's kind of what Carneros is known for, is these kind of clay soils, and it works really, really well for sparkling wine. As we're replanting, we're looking at things like higher vigor rootstocks. We want those roots to tap in deeper. We want them to keep growing. I will be happy to hedge 2 to 3 times a year. Does that happen? Not usually, but in a year like 2023, we did hedge a couple times. So we want the vigor. We don't want at any point to be stressed out. Now, as we switch to organic farming and we can't rely on synthetic fertilizers as jet fuel for our vines, we're having a compost-based fertilizer program. It's becoming more and more challenging, but you are retaining more water as you build the soil carbon up. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at our vineyards as how can we replicate these situations of just zero stress in the vineyards without obviously turning on the irrigation and leaving it on for weeks at a time. And so we have to work with
for the entire month of July.
Yeah, basically for the entire month of July, or even early October,
into August too.
Yeah, and so it's a constant struggle of trying to figure out ways to adapt to that. Controlling your cover crop. We disc a lot. Our soils will crack, and they'll open up a crack about 3 feet down.
Right.
And if you don't turn over the soil and disc it, you're going to lose water very quickly. And you're going to have to supplement with a massive amount of irrigation. And being organic, every time you turn on the water, you're watering weeds, not just vines. And then your weed control bill goes up quite a bit. You have to send in the shovels, which is never cheap. Shovels and weed eaters are the bane of my existence. But yeah, it's all about managing stress levels. We don't pull any leaves unless we have a mildew problem. We want to protect those grapes from the sun. The sun is the enemy in a lot of cases.
Yeah, sunburn is one of your biggest problems in sparkling wine.
Sure, I bet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, we do grow Chardonnay and Carnero, so mildew is a concern, but we've done a pretty good job, I think, in the last 4 years of not really having any huge issues with mildew, even organically. So,
is Spain farm organic?
There are parts. They have vineyards.
So where did it come down to that it happened here the way it did?
Because it's the right thing to do. We're about 5 feet above sea level at the estate vineyard.
Yeah,
and we're only about 7 miles from the bay as the crow flies. So
right.
Anything we put in the ground is eventually going to end up back either in the local the local tributaries or in the ocean. So. Yeah. But also, it's just
definitely gets one of those.
It's making sure that we're doing the right thing for the next generation. You can only take from the land for so long before you need to bring it back in balance and preserve this land for.
So did that come from an initiative here and then had to be sold to Spain, or was it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also look at it as we have a full-time estate vineyard team, so we don't use really any vineyard management. They're all year-round employees. They're not, they don't come and go. We've had a lot of our team members have been here 20 plus years. They were the ones that planted a lot of these vines.
Right.
And, when you're asking them to spray stuff that I wouldn't touch,
right.
Yeah.
If I'm not willing to stick my hand in a bag of it, I'm not going to ask you to. And so, there's PPE, there's a lot of stuff, but accidents happen. People walk into blocks early, stuff gets spilled, people get exposed to chemicals, and there's been a lot of premature deaths in agriculture because of this, and it's just not a risk we need to take. It's not something we need to do. If we can do it another way, why would you put your employees and your employees' families at risk?
Yeah.
And the public.
Yeah.
And the
nobody
public.
Nobody wants to see a report of their wine with Roundup in it.
The other day I was driving through our neighborhood, and this couple, definitely in their late 70s, she was driving the mower with a trailer on it and had a tank that was pressurized, and he was walking behind her, and they were obviously spraying for weeds. Mm-hmm. No protection, no nothing. And I pulled up, I said, is that herbicides? And they said, yeah. And I said, you should really wear a mask at least a mask. And they're like, what are you kidding me? Look how old we are. We're fine. Been doing this for 40 years.
Guy who sold it to me took a sip before.
Yeah, and I think the Roundup gets a bad rep. It is not the best thing in the world, but there's a lot of worse stuff sprayed in vineyards than Roundup. I mean, you look at some of the insecticides. Leaf hopper is a problem in organic vineyards. It's not really a problem in conventional vineyards because it's about, well, at least when I was managing conventional vineyards, it was about $1 an acre spray, and you throw some imidacloprids in your tank, and when you're doing your bloom spray or whatever, and it takes out every insect in the vineyard, and it's $1. It was about $1 an acre, so it's a no-brainer. People just spray it because not because they have a problem, but because it's $1 an acre and it's cheap insurance. So, I mean, and that's much worse than Roundup, and that's pretty standard spray in conventional vineyards. So
Great.
yeah, it's like I said,
I don't even know this stuff, you know.
yeah,
Things that give you nightmares.
yeah. There's stuff that. There's a lot of stuff out there that's pretty nasty, that's pretty commonly used. And
Well, it's like someone said to me, they said, well, we don't use Roundup anymore. We use pre-emergence. And I went, wow, that's awesome. And then I looked into what pre-emergents are, and I was like, ooh, this is not.
it's not awesome.
Not awesome. Not awesome.
Yeah.
It's like
Less awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, in
less
fact,
awesome.
I really do believe the villainization of Roundup has pushed people to worse stuff. And I think it's kind of a, you know,
Yeah, well, when you kill the soil, I mean, so.
yeah, it's a challenge. And like I said, for me, it's about the employees and it's about the community.
Yeah.
And, you know, my team, you know, works their butts off for me and for Gloria Ferrer. And, you know, I don't want to put them at risk for, you know, anything that they don't need to be at risk for. There's enough hazards in the vineyard without chemicals. So
In life in general.
and life in general. Yeah.
And it just so happens that it makes Kyle's job easier.
And it makes Kyle's job. And
It
the
makes
wine
the wine better.
making
It
being
makes the
better
wine
is a
better.
bonus.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I mean, the way you started out the conversation with, you know, you can absolutely look at, you know, the quality difference. It's a, you know, that's coming from you as a winemaker.
Yeah.
And,
So
and
my first vintage here, just to give you, you know, some behind the scenes, we were about 25% A grade wines, about 50% B grade wines, and about 25% C grade. This last rating, we had 0 C grade. We were
Like almost 40%
A grade and 60% B grade. So, I mean, it's shift a full grade point average, the quality of the wines. And I mean, there's other things we're doing in the vineyards to help, but
I wish Being Organic did that for me.
you don't have anything to
No, I
compare
mean,
it
like
didn't
when
have
I
a
was
baseline.
in grades. I grew up with everything organic. My
You didn't
grades
get a
never
1
shifted.
grade point
Not
average
a
boost?
chance.
Well, your website works well. I just ordered off of it while we were.
Oh, yeah. Love that. We made a sale. High five.
Did you the podcast bump? Did you order me a bottle of that Carneros Cuvée while you were at
That
it?
stuff's fun. What'd you
That's
guys think?
fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a special wine.
That's what I'm having right now.
I mean, I think you spoke about it, but any other comments would be great because it's just
It's a
so
20.
rich.
It's a 2013.
Yeah.
It spent. What did it? Was it
It was disgorged probably in
in
21,
in 23?
22,
22.
22.
6/8/22,
So it was 9 years.
bottled in 14.
Wow.
Yeah, so you bottled in 14, disgorged in 22.
And so you guys, of course, have the modern riddling racks.
Yeah, so we do everything mechanically now.
Yeah.
The VLM.
Yeah. Well, that was one that I did not know. There's apparently worldwide a very well-known acronym for gyro pallets that are here in America because they're much bigger than they have in Europe, and they're called VLMs. And I was like, oh, cool. And I was, Brad, have you ever heard this? He's like, oh, yeah, over there they call them very large machines.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's very literal in terms of what it is.
He's not such a subtle acronym.
Questions asked by the FNG, right?
Yeah.
So if you could move to Champaign and work there, would you give up Sonoma life? And
No, I love California.
That's a
He probably would.
You can buy champagne if you have to.
Yeah. I can always travel to
Halftime.
Champagne.
halftime.
It depends because if I could consult in Champagne, that would be fantastic. But I don't know that on the day to day that I'd want it. Like we're talking about, there might be a 3 or 4 year stretch where you don't have a vintage, and not having that level of stress. If this is like your full time gig, I don't know that I would like that level of full time stress. I love drinking the wines. Don't get me wrong, but not having a vintage or not having a job or a very tough job to do for 3 to 4 year stretches at a time is not something that's extremely appealing.
they get it done.
They do.
They do.
And they make some fantastic wines. But yeah, I think
But dang, the sunshine here is nice.
it is. Yeah.
Brad, you
Sometimes the fog clears out there. It doesn't clear in
right?
Yeah.
In Champagne, no.
Yeah.
It's,
Brad, you grew up in a farming family.
No. I grew up in the East Bay. I grew up in Danville. In fact, I still live in Danville, actually. I commute up here every day.
Okay.
But, yeah, did not grow up in a farming family. Studied soil science at Cal Poly.
Okay.
And wanted to go into agriculture, kind of got convinced to do it, and took a summer job, literally like pulling leaves and, shoveling weeds and shoot thinning and lifting wires over in Napa. My buddy at the time, his dad worked for a brew vineyard management. So we were at Screaming Eagle doing a lot of work out there, doing grunt work.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. I didn't know what it was at the time, and everyone's like, wow, you worked at Screaming Eagle? I was like, yeah, I mean, I shoveled a lot of weeds. So, had a huge effect on the wine. But, I thought it was nice being out in the vineyards. I was like, this is a little bit better than, growing almonds or, something like that. And started doing internships and learning more about wine and drinking a lot of wine and figuring out, hey, this is kind of nice. This is a nice gig. So that's how I got into farming and, listening to a lot of people, learning a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of old timers, listen to old timers talk, and you learn a lot from them. So.
And Kyle, when I first met you, you were helping our Scottish friend Steve out, both in the winery and in the tasting room.
Yep.
Was that your first introduction to this? Or
no.
What had you done before that?
That was quite a long way along the way. I was baseball player turned teacher turned.
What position?
I was a catcher.
How are those knees
He keeps
doing?
throwing out his back.
Yeah, I'm feeling it now. I'm really upset with 18-year-old me that he didn't take a lot more stretching time. And, when I had the training room and people were there for massages and ice baths, I'm really sad that I didn't take more advantage of that.
Yeah, but you were the catcher. You weren't allowed to have any,
I know, right? There was
aches and pains.
No, you just kept going. You just battled through it. So, but I kind of came to this about an organic route, and it was actually
No pun intended.
Good plug right there for organic farming, right? And I was very fortunate enough that John Kelly, who used to own Westwood Wine, gave me my start. I was working at Gary Farrell at the time after I got done teaching and decided wine was what I wanted to do. And John gave me my start in the cellar. And from there, it was kind of like Brad said, I looked strategically at winemakers that I really respected and wineries that I had really respected. And I spent a lot of time in the Napa Valley at places like Clopagas and Charles Krug, and most recently at Artesa. And Steve was fortunate enough to give me an interlude along the way as a little bit of a break from doing, at Charles Krug, I was making 1.8 million cases a year. So it was a little bit of a different scale, and I wanted to scale back a little bit. So Steve and I had been friends for a long time, and he was saying, hey, I need some help. Can you come on over? And I said, hey, I need something that's a little bit more my fit. And it was very nice. And then from there, I moved over to Artesa and did a number of different brands and made a lot of wine for Artesa and for Codorniu and for some clients as well. And
because Artesa's big, or Codorniu's
big, yeah. We made 58 different wines every year at Artesa. So it was definitely, after doing that for almost 6 years, I was ready to take a step back and focus only on sparkling. So was very fortunate enough to have the opportunity to come over to Gloria Ferrer and focus on sparkling full time, because that's been my passion since I got started making it in 2017. Was when I started making sparkling wine.
Okay, so since it's just before New Year's and people are thinking about their bubbles that they've probably already bought at this point.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about when you pour bubbles into talk about glassware and talk about bubbles. Like the actual bubbles that we look at and are mesmerized by.
Sure, yeah. My favorite way to serve bubbles is actually not in a flute. The flute was actually designed so you could see that nice chimney of beautiful pearlescent bubbles that came to the top and broke and made little splashes on the top. But it's really tough to get the aromatic profile or the feel of the wine out of those really tall, skinny flutes. Totally. I really like it if you can get, like, the white wine glasses that you guys have here are fantastic. If you can get anything that's kind of tulip shaped, they're fantastic. But those bubbles are what we do. It's a part of the process that takes a long time to figure out because, again, we're working with pressure here. So got to make sure that you don't over pressurize, right? And you have bottles explode, and then you don't want it under pressurized where you're not having any bottles coming up. But for us, it's all about the show. So you've seen with all of our sparkling wines, that persistent fine mousse, that's really what we focus on. And it's another tactile impression that I love about sparkling wine. When you get somebody that does it correctly and has method champenoise wines that are made in the proper manner, you get a very fine, silky, smooth mousse. And those bubbles come in And everything, the thing I like about sparkling wine is it delivers all the good things on your palate and just turns it up to 11 because it's delivered via CO2, right? You get injected with all the good stuff.
Yeah, they're more than just pretty bubbles. They lift all the aromatics.
Yes.
They really make everything dance across the palate. And
Yeah.
And they work in your stomach too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all part of the process.
It is.
Yeah.
Beautiful thing.
I do think any white wine glass is probably.
When did they actually make it illegal for everybody in America to call this champagne?
That's a good question.
I'm not sure of the exact date.
It
but I
wasn't
know
that long ago.
It was after Corbel started calling theirs, and they're the only one that's grandfathered in to actually call it champagne still. So that had to be.
So they created the problem, and yet they got grandfathered in.
I think
everybody was, but I think they're being one of the larger producers of sparkling in California.
Cheap money always gets what he wants.
There you go. I think it was probably the mid 1900s is going to be my guess. Gonna have to pull the phone out on that one.
Yeah.
Sam's already there.
I'm looking for it.
So, still wines, the Chardonnay that we have, 2021 Vista Reserve. Talk about it. Where does it come from?
Yeah, I can talk about still wines a little bit.
I hope it's certainly. I'm sure it's not the. It's not just the leftovers.
No, it wouldn't. It would be quite acidic if it was the leftovers. But essentially, in 2020, we had the fires, so we did not make any still wine in 2020. Gloria Ferrer had a pretty robust still wine program before that. I
remember, as I said earlier, Syrah. Was there Merlot too?
Yeah. Quite a few Pinots, quite a few Chardonnays.
And that Merlot and those clay soils, if I remember right, they were pretty good.
Yeah. The Merlot does not exist anymore. It was since been grafted over to Pinot Noir.
Yep.
I think that happened about 2010.
Same thing with the Syrah.
Same thing with the Syrah. We really wish we had that Syrah still. We talked about that this morning, I think, about how we wish we had that Syrah. That would be nice, especially with today's climate on those that's actually on one of the rockier sites. But yeah, so in 2020 gave us, in 21 a chance to kind of hit the reset button and reevaluate our still wine program. We had like 4 different Chardonnays and like 5 different Pinot Noirs. There was a clonal series. There was, a single vineyard series. There was a lot of different stuff going on. It wasn't really cohesive. They weren't stylistically dramatically different, a lot of them. So what we did is in 2021, I started that year, and then we kind of had an interim winemaker between Kyle and the last winemaker, and we sat down and we looked at a map, a soils map and a clonal map, and we were like both coming at this with fresh eyes and saying, we think these clones, these rootstocks, these soils would make the best Pinot Noir and the best Chardonnays for still wine, and we essentially, roped off 4 rows, farmed them a little differently, pulled some leaves, turned the water off a little earlier. All that sort of stuff, and just kind of made a barrel or 2 from each block, and just to evaluate what we had, take an inventory essentially of what we had out there. Obviously, the heavy clay soils maybe not ideal for Pinot Noir, for still wine. We got some stuff up in the hills at the Circle Bar Ranch, especially that's on some rocky, like more Laniger loam type stuff. That's, really shallow, rocky soils, a lot more stress in the vines, things like that. More still wine clones versus sparkling wine clones planted up in the hills. I believe that was done intentionally. I would hope it was done intentionally, but a lot of
seems so.
Dijon clones. We have Colmar 538, which is an Alsatian Pinot Noir clone. Quite a bit of that up there. We've got some interesting stuff that's planted. So like I said, we made about 2 barrels of each and kind of use that as an opportunity to evaluate. There were a couple blocks that really stood above the rest, where they really stood out as being the best, and they want to make still wine. And so, especially Pinot Noir being the challenging one. Chardonnay, you can make very good Chardonnay on those clay loam soils, but Pinot Noir is a little bit more difficult. And so we ended up creating a 3-tier system kind of for our Pinot Noir. So we have our Carneros Pinot Noir, which is very, very little, if any, new oak, much more red fruit, higher acidity, fresher, lighter style of Pinot Noir.
Yep.
Then our Vista Reserve Pinot Noir, which is a little bit of red fruit, a little bit of black fruit, a small amount of new oak. It's more baking spice, more
20%.
clove. It's got more of that character, a little bit of cola character. And then we have a single vineyard from our L block, which is in the it's in the northwest corner of our Circle Bar Ranch, on these really rocky soils. It's if you're heading past Vianza going south on 121, you look up in the hills. Yeah. It's up in the hills up there, right below Wildcat Mountain Ranch.
Yep.
And
that's like 500 feet or something.
Yeah, it's about 500 feet elevation, and
it goes up to 500 feet.
You go up a big hill.
It's like straight up.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't realize
from 6 to 500.
Yeah,
right?
essentially. Yeah,
you don't realize how big that hill is.
Yeah, it's a big hill.
If you're out on Rommel Road and you look across, you really get the sense of how
it
high
comes
that
straight
hill
off the valley floor.
Yeah.
But there's just it goes straight up, and then there's a little bit of a shelf. And L Block sits on that little shelf up there, and it's I call it a dummy proof vineyard. It's so well drained. It's so the soil's like red. It almost gets red. It seeps some red.
There's definitely like a volcanic rip. Right,
there's a ton of
it,
volcanic rock in there, like that pumicey type stone in there.
Yeah.
And every year it makes phenomenal Pinot Noir.
Very concentrated.
Yeah. So
very high tannin.
Those are kind of our 3 Pinot Noirs. Chardonnay, we kind of mirrored that. So we made a Carneros Pinot Noir, which is no malolactic, no oak, all stainless steel. We pick it very early. It's kind of almost right after we finish sparkling harvest. That's the next thing that gets picked. It's
21, 22 and a half.
Yeah, it's really pretty. It's really fresh. It's almost Sauvignon Blanc,
Chablis,
kind of Chablis, like
yes.
it's very acid forward, bright. It's actually field blended with some Muscat clone Chardonnay in the block that it comes from. So it has some pops of like some really interesting floral
white flowers.
Yeah, it's maybe 1% of the vines that are in there, but it's enough to give it that little pop. And then our next step up is our Vista Reserve. That's usually that's a state fruit that comes from the hills around the winery, the blocks around the winery. We have some still wine clones, some Dijon clones that were planted specifically for still wine production. So those that program is based on those. That sees a little bit of oak. That does see malolactic fermentation.
It's all barrel fermented.
Yeah, and then we haven't been able to plant a block yet or find a block on our property that we think is worthy of like a single vineyard Chardonnay. So we've gone out and we've worked with a couple of our grower partners, that Gloria Ferrer, the San Giacomo family, which Gloria Ferrer has been buying fruit from since the very first harvest in 1984.
Yep.
So 40 years we've been buying fruit from them in some capacity. And so we decided to reach out to them, and they have their Green Acres Ranch, and we're buying a little bit of Old Wenty clone Chardonnay from the Green Acres Ranch and making a single vineyard Chardonnay. And then we've been working with Durrell Ranch as well. So Durrell is another one that we've been sourcing fruit from for a long time. And we were lucky enough to get into one of their, I was working with Rob and asking him, kept bugging him, hey, man, when can we get into some of those good Chardonnay blocks? And finally one opened up, and we were able to get about 9 tons of some really, really special Chardonnay from Durrell. So now we've been making the San Giacomo. This was the third vintage for the San Giacomo and the second vintage for the Durrell in 2024. So we're really liking what we're seeing from those. Eventually the goal is to plant and be able to produce that single vineyard wine from our estate. We are an estate-driven brand. We used to purchase quite a bit of fruit, but we've pretty much stopped except for a little bit from San Giacomo, and that 8 tons from Durrell. We're all estate grown now. So
because there was always that one cuvee of Gloria sparkling that was very affordable, very high quality for, and it was it a Sonoma County
Sonoma
though?
Brut. Yep.
Sonoma Brut,
Sonoma Brut.
and it was Sonoma
like
County.
every wedding, anytime when someone get married, they go, "Do you got an in for some sparkling wine?" It was always like Gloria Ferrer. It was a Sonoma Brut.
So we are still producing, and
and how many cases is that?
It's vintage dependent.
Yeah. Because it is now it's estate. It's
So
almost all estate grown now.
Was it always estate grown?
No.
Okay, that's right.
So like I said, we're trying to bring everything back to the estate vineyard and be able to be self-sufficient off the estate vineyard, with the exception of these little special things here and there.
Right.
And I think it's really important for us to have control, especially as we move towards organic. Not easy to find sparkling wine clones that are certified organic. And if we want to eventually be able to put that on our bottles, then that's going to be a challenge. And so bringing it in-house is the way to do it.
Yeah.
And then if you want to up quality, just like sparkling winemaking is a special skill, sparkling viticulture is also very specialized. Big time. So it's difficult to go out and just purchase fruit on the open market and expect it to meet your quality standards. Yeah. So it's a specialty product, really.
According to the grape grower, anyway.
I mean, you can do it.
I'm just teasing.
You can do it. You can go out. It's just not going to meet the same quality standards.
Your point is very.
He was giving me shit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, okay. I'm used to being the grape grower that's
right. You're used to taking the punches. No,
it was a poor attempt.
All right. So it's New Year's Eve. What are you popping, Kyle?
Ooh, I am big right now into Royal Cuvée.
I saw you went back to that.
Yeah. It's a crowd favorite.
I just really love that wine. You get the slightly oxidative character, but still fresh fruit and a little bit of baking spice. It's my go-to for kind of special occasions and just anything fun.
Yeah, it's delicious.
It's a showstopper. For you pour this for people, and they're like, "Oh,
I'm going to be having the Illumina
between the fruit and the aged character."
Yeah.
That's all about the aged character.
Yeah. Right.
This still has some fruit, which is nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to have two.
Yeah.
This and the Cuvée.
Yeah.
Cha-ching. I see no reason to deviate.
yeah, why not?"
Yeah.
Brad,
And no reason to limit it to one.
What's in your ice bucket New Year's Eve?
I think I'm really enjoying the Method Ancestral Kyle made, and I know
he's the number one depletion so far.
Between the Illumina.
How come our margins are so low on this one? We sold it all at an employee discount.
No, I've been drinking the crap out of that stuff. It's because you're not adding extra sugar to it for the tirage. It's basically you finish the fermentation in the bottle. It's sitting at what, like 10.5% or something?
Yeah, so it's 10.5%.
So it's a lot.
Then no dosage.
Zero dosage. It's bone dry. It's got super awesome acidity, fresh, bright fruit. It's a really unique sparkling wine. I mean, and you have, it essentially is a refined pet nat, but it's done in a way that from a sparkling wine house that knows.
Is it under cork or is it under?
It's under cork. So I discorched.
Oh, because you discorched it, right.
I was kind of thinking like. For a 40th, I did this as a test in 23, and it was about 5 cases, and it was really cool. And we poured it for our GM, Mel, and she was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, it's this project." And she was like, "Can you do it commercial?" I was like, "Absolutely." So I went to I went to our director of operations, Victor, and I was like, "Dude, we're gonna do Method Ancestral like for real." And I was like, "It's gonna be so fun." He's like, "Do you really think that sounds like fun? You and I have different definitions of fun." And luckily he was on board because it was a labor of love. That was a tough wine to get through across the finish line, and we learned a lot because essentially what I was looking at is like Pet Nat is hot. People love Pet Nat right now, but everybody's making a Bouge Nouveau as well. And I wanted something that was a celebration for our 40th harvest. Yeah. But I wanted it to be sparkling wine quality. Yeah. Right? Like I didn't want it to disgorge it hazy, dirty, like sometimes bottles explode with Pet Nat and you hit the ceiling and you're like, well, that's just part of the process. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to hit one of our customers and send him to the hospital. So we did it, and I wanted Pet Nat is also usually lower pressure. I wanted it at true sparkling wine pressure. So there was a whole lot of technical side that went into making that wine.
A lot of math.
It was a lot of math, and but I think it's super cool because you have a wine that is 1.5% less alcohol than sparkling, but it's at the sparkling pressure, no sugar, no dosage, nothing. That's just the purest form of what we made this harvest.
It's a beautiful wine.
And it's really cool.
And this is available on the website?
It's probably sold out.
I think it might be sold out.
I think it sold out through Club like the day it was released.
I have a feeling he's going to have to make it again next year, though.
You got a bottle out of your stash you can give me, Brad?
There might be some.
Your website is easy to use. The Illumina is on there. The Cuvée is on there. The 2012, I believe. We've got a 2013
as well.
And 2021 here.
Yeah, and we've got some library wines available. We talked about those extended tirage wines. Those ones are available. You may have to call to get them or come into the winery.
So on that note, because it is one of the most amazing, a different perspective, amazing view from the valley. Like I always think about the view from Gunlock Bunchu looking basically across.
We were just there.
You can look
we
at,
were like, hey, there's us.
Right, yeah. Talk about the tasting room. Talk about the experience coming to Gloria.
Yeah, so we have a lot of fun things going on. We do encourage reservations so we can help curate the experience better for you, but we do accept walk-ins as well. We have our Carneros experience, which is come in and taste a broad range of our wines. We have our culinary journey where our estate chef, Jason, will walk you through a series of 4 or 5 different pairings with our sparkling wines. And then the big thing that we're launching next year is the return of our chef series. So Chef Jason is going to do 6 curated dinners, all with a theme. So different food styles, different themes, and pair them all with our sparkling wines. So a lot of what we're starting to do is showcase sparkling pairing with food and show that it's not just something that is to start the night or have the first glass and then move on. It's something that you can have all the way through the meal. I mean, last weekend, I had some friends over. We had that Carneros Cuvée with steak. And most people don't think about serving.
No, it'd be great with steak.
Yeah, you got the phenolic content there. It's almost the phenolic structure.
Cuts right through it.
Yeah. Get a nice big old cut of ribeye right there with a big old fat cap on it, and it's perfect.
I mean, anybody who's not drinking sparkling wine through the entire night just isn't trying hard enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so everything, we encourage people to go to the website and make a reservation. And then we have things like our rosé experience if you want to do all rosé. We have an extended tirage experience, which you get to taste all of our reserve wines plus our extended tirage wines. That one tends to go quickly. It's very small groups. Those are very small focus groups. And you'll come in, I think right now on the menu, there's like 03 Carneros, 04 Royal.
Which are both phenomenal.
Yeah, and then we just started working on, I just disgorged 05 Royal and 06 Royal. And then 2010 Blanc de Blanc.
Your tasting menus sound awesome too.
Yeah, Chef Jason. I asked him how much it would be.
Brunch is coming back in the spring.
Brunch comes back in the spring.
Is super popular.
And you used to do a Catalan.
Yeah, that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened.
That was maybe that was pre-COVID.
I think that was pre-COVID, and I think it got a little wild and out of hand.
You mean it was like a party?
Oh yeah. I've heard some stories.
It's Catalonia.
But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of amazing experiences. Brunch and lunch being really fun, especially a good date day, get away. Gloria Ferrer is super close to the city.
Enjoy the view, enjoy the food, enjoy the wines.
Easy to pop up here. We're one of the first wineries coming up, and it's a nice day trip for people in the city or people in the Bay Area.
Awesome.
Yeah. You guys on social media a lot?
I am.
Brad is.
Yes.
A matter of fact, you want to talk about that eucalyptus tree for a minute?
Oh my God.
Were you there when you?
I was not there. It happened on Saturday, and so we had a big windstorm on Saturday.
Yeah.
And we had on the Circle Bar Ranch, we got some 150-year-old eucalyptus trees that run on the north border of the ranch. 150 foot tall eucalyptus trees, and we had two of them go down in that rainstorm, and missed the vineyard by about 3 feet, and took out some fencing and blocked our road. And always great to come in on a Monday and have 250 foot trees down and in the rain have to go through and have the team go chop them up. And
and the thing about it is they just removed a eucalyptus on Grove near where I live, and it's one thing once they get it down, but then you got to get rid of that massive base of the tree, and all those trees are a nightmare. 10 to 12 feet across at the minimum.
Those trees are a nightmare. I mean, there's no good way to get rid of them,
and there's nothing good.
There's nothing good with eucalyptus. Maybe they block the wind a little bit, but
Thank Jack London.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Those eucalyptus trees are tough, but you can find me at Brad the Wine Guy on Instagram. I try and post, at least a few times a week, if not more. I usually post to my story a lot more and post fun stuff that we're doing at Gloria and the vineyards and the cellar and tasting room, wine travel. You can see some of my Livermore stuff on there too. So
Kyle, not so
the
much
Livermore
on the
is the Vine
I am
Farm
probably
Ridge.
the worst millennial in the world. I don't do any social media whatsoever. So
I thought winemakers are just supposed to post on Instagram. Isn't that the job?
He's the worst Instagram winemaker of all time.
I'm like the worst millennial in the world.
And Bart, about those eucalyptus trees, when we were here, I mean, back in the late 80s as tourists, and we'd come up Broadway, and there's that whole line of eucalyptus trees. You can just roll down the window, and it's like,
Yeah, most of them are gone now. Though there was a lot.
We're here. We're back. We're in Sonoma.
All through on 121 coming up into Sonoma, along the Ravenswood side and the Circle Bar, the Circle. It was all eucalyptus, and that's all gone now.
Yeah, there's still quite a few over, but probably
a couple less now.
When they planted that vineyard out there, they cut down about half of them, and I guess there was some articles written about Gloria Ferrer cutting down historic trees, and so they had to stop. But they got about half of them down before they got the bad press. So I wish they'd gotten a few more, but we got 2 more this weekend. So
The only time I've ever heard eucalyptus really talked about as historic was Milo Shepherd, who was the great grandnephew of Jack London. The state park went in and cut down a bunch of eucalyptus trees up there, and then, of course, to kill them, they sprayed them with Roundup. And Milo had some vineyard that got burned from the drift, and he was quite upset about it. And he went to the state park, and he told us a story of, he said to them, well, they're not from here, they're not native. Mm-hmm. And he says it's a state historic park, and the reason why they're here is because they were brought here by the man who you're celebrating the history of, and you cut them all down and you burn my vineyard.
All right, I'll give him a pass for that case, but not next to our vineyard.
You wouldn't have said squat if it hadn't burned the vineyard.
Guys,
That's exactly right.
Shout outs for staff, friends, etc. Anything?
We got to give a shout out to everybody at Gloria Ferrer. This has been a fantastic harvest. Our vineyard crew went through, picked everything in what did we do? 19 days. Yeah, picked everything in 19 days. Those guys absolutely knocked it out. Our production crew is back to scourging right now, and our tasting room staff and chef and culinary are just. You guys got to come see us because you'll see what it's all about.
Sounds beautiful.
Tasting room got remodeled a couple of years ago, and so if you haven't been recently, it's a lot of fun.
I've been out there a long time.
Yeah, shout out to our vineyard team. They're sloshing around in the mud out there doing some pre-pruning, so that's never fun. So they're always getting the hard jobs, but
in the clay they all go out and they're all
you sink about down
5'8".
Yeah.
You lose a boot every step.
It's one of two things: you either sink down to your knees or you gain an inch every step you take. So yeah.
Sam, Bart. Oh, by the way, congratulations on Dane Occidental in Los Angeles.
Dane Hansen on his way to Occidental.
I like that, and not the town.
And not the town, yes.
Although that wouldn't be bad.
Right, exactly. He's super excited, and we're really proud of him.
Congrats to Dane.
And it removed a whole layer of pressure in our household that we don't have to worry about it anymore.
God bless.
So, yeah.
Happy
now you get to pay for
it.
Yeah, fortunately, Terry is very good financially, and I think the minute that she realized she was pregnant, that she started saving. So we're good. We're good. So. And he got a little bit of money from because I guess he's a good student. It's awesome.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Takes after his mother.
When's this show coming out?
This show's coming out. This is
this Friday.
Next Friday. No. This is right before
Right before
New Year's Eve.
Oh, between
after Christmas.
Probably there'll still be some tickets available to
maybe
New Year's Eve. Marty O'Reilly, Sean Carskadden, and the Hattie Craven Band at Spastani Theater.
Can't wait to see Sean again.
We're going to pop a bunch of bottles. Maybe we got to pick up some of these. A couple Royal Cuvées.
I could add to my order.
I might have to.
If you give me your credit card.
I might talk to them instead of you.
Sorry. I get some special stuff.
I'm going to talk to those guys.
I figured that they run a business. They need to make some money so they can bring wine here so we can taste it.
We can work some things out.
All right. Sounds good.
We got olive oil. Our olive oil's in. We it's a great year for olive oil. We have more
olive oil. We'll go swap.
See, this is why I'm not doing your order, John. The olive oil's in. We went into 500 milliliter bottles, and we have like 50 cases, which is a lot for us. So it's on the website for the first time ever,
and paired with a Zin,
and paired with that little gift package because give yourself a gift after the first of the year. The Zin and the estate, the estate Zinfandel, the estate olive oil grows side by side, drink it side by side. So
grows together, goes together.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was trying to say something clever. Brad, you're hired.
There's your marketing campaign.
Bart, anything else?
No, I'm real excited about my latest releases, the Los Chamizal Zinfandel from 21, and then side by side with the 21 Rancho Agua Caliente. They're such drastically different wines. It's real fun to taste them together. So that and, the tank is open. Come visit us this winter. We have a very good heater.
Get tanked with Bart.
Come get tanked in the tank.
We're not supposed to say that anymore.
Do you know the story?
Somebody told me we
this
shouldn't say
tank?
the tank did the tank thing.
Well, yeah. But then someone else said, you need some T-shirts that say, get tanked at the tank.
I got tanked with Bart Hansen.
Right, I know.
His tasting room is in a how many gallon?
It's like a 12,000 gallon redwood tank.
Wow. We'll have to come by and visit.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah. So
thanks, guys.
you guys, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah.
Drink more bubbles.
Yeah,
drink more
toast your
bubbles.
New Year's with some Gloria Ferrer.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Guys. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Cheers. Talk to you next year. Bye.